It would be an understatement to say that I grew up with The Walking Dead. The show came out in 2011 when I was 9 years old and ended in 2023 when I was and currently am 20 years old. I jumped in around season 4 in 2014, so at the time I would have been 11. Why did my parents let me watch this when I was 11? Questionable parenting aside, it was a lot of fun. Every Sunday night for years, my family and I would get together on Sunday nights and watch the episodes as they came out. We did it much more religiously starting at season 6, but I watched most of season 4 and 5 by myself when I could. Spoiler for things that happened literally 8 years ago, but Beth and Tyrese's death for some reason are very memorable events for me. But truthfully, I hadn't, and to this day still haven't, seen the entirety of The Walking Dead. I think, like most people, I fell off around season 8 when Rick decided to keep Negan alive. Truthfully though, COVID hit and I ended up just working a lot, so I was just too busy to keep up with the show. But recently after the show's ending, it kind of piqued my interest again, so I figured we could all sit down and remember the good times of the show and try to figure out objectively, without any predetermined biases that we had when we watched the show originally, how good this show was, or alternatively, how good this show wasn't. So for the next few months, season by season, I'm going to review every single season of The Walking Dead and culminate it into a final review of the show, starting, of course, with Season 1. Season 1 is different from the rest of the seasons in the series for multiple large reasons. These include, but are not limited to, the fact that Season 1 only has 6 episodes and lacks a larger main antagonist, but neither of those things are surprisingly to the show's detriment. Saying that the show lacks a larger antagonist at this point would be a bit of a lie, because at this time, the greatest threat of the show is still the walkers, when through most of the show it's the living people. Most people would tell you the biggest threat in the show is the walkers, but as we see with Shane's character shift in season 2, that's not exactly true for a lot of the time. Don't get me wrong, Shane is still a threat for this season. He causes multiple rifts in the group, but for all intents and purposes, he really isn't a major antagonist in this season. The same goes for the existence of the group in the episode Vatos. The first season of the show largely exists simply to set up the world that The Walking Dead is. It's a cruel world where the people are mean and the dead people are meaner. That line was a little cringe, but moving on. Our season opens with our main character, Ricky Doodah Grimes, and his partner Shane Walsh, but after Rick gets turned to American Swiss cheese, he's put into the coma and wakes up in the apocalypse. And you know, I typically hate shows where a character is like plunged into a new world, sort of, but I think Walking Dead does it a lot better than other shows for multiple reasons. For starters, Rick quickly figures this shit out, largely thanks to Morgan, a minor character in the series who only appears in this episode but is referenced throughout the rest of the season, and of course does come back in later seasons. And pretty much everything else gets set up after that, and it's not in any way annoying either. The threat of the series is established really quickly. You get bit, you die, and they can't see, they can only hear you. You just have to stay quiet, which is actually a lot bigger of a problem than you think, because guns counter zombies, but guns attract zombies. You see the problem here? Rick also acclimates to the apocalypse quite quickly, so we don't have to worry about him slowly figuring shit out that we figured out episodes ago. Regardless, after Rick gets the American lore explained to him, he quickly sets out to find his wife and son, Lori and Carl. But after getting trapped in Atlanta, he meets the main group, consisting of, but not limited to, Daryl, Glenn, Andrea, and Merle. And the show really takes off in episode 2. And I give the show points for managing to keep it really quick and snappy throughout most of the season. Episodes near the end of the season slow down, which is weird to say because the season's only 6 episodes. So to be more specific, episodes 5 and 6 are a lot slower, at least in terms of action, but they set up very crucial themes for the rest of the series. I mean, the largest theme of this is probably the fact that although you may find Sanctuary, it just won't last forever. I think what makes Walking Dead so great is the characters and their relationships and their growth. I once heard someone say that Walking Dead is more of a soap opera than it really is a show about zombies, and I think that's really true. I mean, you have a revolving door of cast members. Like, nobody's really there for more than like 5 seasons on average, and that's probably on the high end. And once again, I want to specify that's on average. That I am aware of. There are only 2 characters, Carol and Daryl, that make it from season 1 to the end of the show. Regardless of that, Daryl is a great example of what good character development looks like in The Walking Dead. He becomes a much more fleshed out character in the 6 episodes this season has. He goes from being pretty rash and self-centered to actually being a very kind person, and this is much more explored in season 2, but we do see bits of it and pieces of it happening here. It's also easy to say that Rick becomes a much more hardened person because of episode 4 after meeting the group, but truthfully, we don't really know what Rick was like before the apocalypse. Not to mention, he's already shown to be a quick-witted and natural leader because we see him take down Merle. Also, quick pop quiz, what do Rick and Merle have in common? That's right, they both dropped the hard R in episode 3. I didn't even realize Rick had said it. My friend told me and I literally did not believe it until I went back and watched it, and then after I heard it, I went back and watched it again with captions on, and it was wild. It was wild to hear Rick Grimes say the hard R. I don't have a point in saying this, I just found it funny that I never noticed Rick said it even though I've seen that episode so many times. Not only do their characters develop, but the bonds with each other do. Shane and Lori are a great example of this, as well as Glenn and Dale. I think that this show is really fantastic at creating realistic people and then creating realistic bonds between them. The soundtrack for the show is also unnecessarily good. They don't use much licensed music, but when they do, it usually hits. But even if they didn't use unlicensed music, I think I hardly would have noticed because the score for this show is just so good. But don't get me wrong, if there was ever a scene of Daryl riding off into the distance while Britney Spears plays in the background, I'm on board. The special effects for the show are really good, save like the CGI explosion of the CDC. But to be fair, it's 2010's TV CGI, but I'm basing the show off of how good it is today, how well it stood the test of time, and to be honest, I don't really think it did stand the test of time. It looks pretty odd today. But I mean, that's not really the special effects I think we're paying attention to when we're watching the show. What really shines is the makeup for the walkers. Throughout the entirety of the show, it's always been really good. I mean, the CGI can look wonky here and there. Like if someone gets stabbed in the face and for some reason the effect is CGI and not practical, it can be somewhat noticeable at first. I hardly noticed it like the first 2 times. It may even be in the second season where it jumped out at me, so I'll see if I can find the footage we're talking about, but I might just be gaslighting myself into believing this at this point. The show is also just really well directed and beautifully shot. There's some amazing cinematography in the show. They get some really good shots that emphasize exactly what kind of drab and dreary place that the world has become now. The scripts are sharp and the actors deliver their lines perfectly. Andrew Lincoln and John Bernthal not only being the protagonists but standout actors for this season. I think that Normie Reedus and Stephen Yeun also pull their weight really well, but he doesn't really get that many lines near the end of the series. T-Dog also gets kind of pushed to the back a lot of the time. But I think that's because the Walking Dead writers don't actually know how to write black people until like season 3. Overall, the first season of The Walking Dead was really good. There's not really a whole awful lot to say about it. I mean, it's 6 episodes long. You can get through it in a day as it's only 4.5 hours. But for what it is, it's pretty great, so I'm gonna give season 1 of The Walking Dead a 9 out of 10. Great start to a series for sure. I'm excited to continue doing this series. I remember not liking season 8, but I think now that I'm older and more open-minded, I'll find it more interesting. Let me know if you guys think I should do Fear the Walking Dead after this, but maybe I should do that long after I finish this series. I haven't actually seen any of it. I haven't even read reviews for it either, so I'm actually free from bias on that show. But I am willing to review every season of that show after I finish this one, hopefully sometime before the end of summer. I am a student and a part-time worker, so it does get a little difficult to balance between part-time work, doing schoolwork, and doing YouTube, which is my true passion. So if you guys would like and subscribe, that honestly helps me out a lot. I mean, if my videos start doing well enough, I could make this my part-time job, which is the goal, admittedly. Anyway, me, Carl, and Judith here are going to get started on watching season 2, which I should have a video out on sometime before the end of February. I'm not exactly sure when this episode is going up, but I'll try to have at least 1 season done a month at the minimum, but we'll see you guys next week regardless.